The first contradiction arrived quietly. A man who called himself the devil stood in a world that already worshipped false gods, and nothing about him felt theatrical enough to be a lie. He didn't burn the sky. He didn't demand souls. He didn't arrive with prophecy or warning. He simply appeared, calm and observant, in a universe built on fear, cameras, and control. A universe where power wore costumes and truth was edited out before it ever reached the public. The unsettling part wasn't that he claimed to be Lucifer Morningstar. It was that no one could tell him he was wrong. People had seen monsters before. They had cheered for them. They had learned to clap while cities bled quietly beneath the noise. But this was different. This presence didn't threaten the body. It unsettled the rules. It made people hesitate before lying. It made heroes feel exposed. It made institutions feel suddenly fragile like glass under pressure. The contradiction wasn't that the devil walked among superheroes. The contradiction was that, for the first time, the world's most powerful people felt judged without being attacked. In a place where strength was measured in explosions and death tolls, something else had entered the equation. Something patient, something observant, something that didn't seem impressed by force at all. And the question that followed wasn't who he was. It was why this world reacted to him like it had been waiting. If this story pulls you in, don't treat it like background noise. Stay with it. Let the silence between moments settle. Let the questions linger longer than the answers. Some stories aren't meant to be consumed quickly. They're meant to sit with you, uncomfortable and unresolved. If you choose to remain here, you're choosing to listen closely, the way characters in this world will have to. And once you start listening, it becomes much harder to look away. The city didn't notice him at first. Cities rarely do. They're too busy swallowing sound, too busy pretending that motion equals meaning. Sirens cut through the evening like old habits. Screens glowed in apartment windows. Somewhere, a crowd cheered for something they would forget by morning. And into all of that noise, Lucifer Morningstar stepped without ceremony, as if he'd always been there and the world had simply failed to look. He stood on a sidewalk beneath a flickering streetlight, the kind that hummed softly, irregularly, like it was tired of pretending to work. Rain-dark asphalt reflected the neon of a convenience store sign. People passed him without slowing, shoulders hunched, eyes forward, each one wrapped in their own small urgency. For a moment, he did nothing at all. He listened, not to words, but to the weight beneath them, the wanting, the constant grinding pressure of it. This universe felt different from the others he had known, not louder, not crueler, just more dishonest about why it was cruel. A bus roared past, wind tugging at his coat. The air carried the smell of exhaust and cheap food and wet concrete. Lucifer smiled faintly, not amused, not impressed, curious. Above him, a billboard flashed an image of a man in a cape, teeth white, eyes bright, arms crossed in a pose designed to feel protective. The slogan beneath promised safety. Lucifer tilted his head, studying it like a piece of bad art. "So that's what passes for divinity here," he murmured, barely audible even to himself. Across the city, in a glass-walled conference room high above the streets, Stan Edgar paused mid-sentence. He didn't know why. There was no alert, no vibration, no assistant whispering in his ear. He simply felt a momentary hesitation, like a thought that had slipped out of sequence. He frowned just slightly, then continued speaking, his voice smooth, controlled, reassuring. Numbers moved on a screen. Markets stabilized. Control remained intact, or so it seemed. In a studio downtown, Annie January stood beneath hot lights, smiling on cue while a handler counted down with raised fingers. Her jaw ached from holding the expression. The applause sign flashed and the audience obeyed. She felt the familiar hollowness settle in her chest, the sense of performing a version of herself that no longer fit. For a split second, she thought of stopping, of saying something unscripted. The thought scared her more than Homelander ever had. She pushed it away and smiled wider. On a rooftop not far away, Homelander hovered alone, cape snapping in the wind. The city sprawled beneath him like something owned. He watched traffic crawl and people move like ants, and he felt powerful in the way he always did when no one else was close enough to see the cracks. Still, something irritated him, an itch he couldn't place. He clenched his fists, heat vision flaring for an instant before he forced it down. Control mattered. Appearances mattered. He told himself that over and over until the words lost their edges. Lucifer began to walk. He didn't head toward towers or stages. He moved through side streets, past shuttered storefronts and bars where laughter spilled out too loudly. He watched a man argue into a phone, voice tight with desperation, promising something he couldn't deliver. He watched a woman sit on a stoop and cry silently, shoulders shaking while people stepped around her like she was furniture. Every few steps, he felt the same thing again and again. Desire twisted into compromise, truth bent until it fit inside fear. At a crosswalk, he stopped beside a young man in a delivery jacket, helmet tucked under one arm. The light was red. Cars idled. The young man bounced on his heels, checking his phone, jaw tight. Without looking at him, Lucifer spoke. "What do you desire?" The question landed softly, not loud enough to draw attention. The young man stiffened like he'd been touched somewhere tender. He frowned, confused, then laughed under his breath. "What kind of question is that?" he muttered, more to himself than anyone else. The light changed. He stepped forward, then stopped abruptly. His breath hitched. "I desire," he said, the words slipping out before he could catch them, "to stop feeling like I'm failing all the time." His eyes widened in shock. He looked around, embarrassed, as if expecting someone to mock him. No one did. The cars moved. The city continued. Lucifer watched him for a moment, then nodded once. "Then stop measuring yourself by rules you didn't write," he said quietly. The young man stared, mouth open, then shook his head and hurried across the street, heart pounding, not sure why his chest felt lighter and heavier at the same time. Lucifer stayed where he was until the crowd swallowed the moment completely. High above, a camera on a traffic pole glitched for half a second. The footage skipped, then corrected itself. Somewhere in a monitoring room, a technician frowned at the screen, then shrugged it off. Glitches happened. Systems were imperfect. That belief was comforting. Lucifer resumed walking, and with each step the air around him seemed to grow subtly denser, as if reality itself were paying closer attention. He felt it then, faint but unmistakable. A pressure, distant and curious, not from this world. Not yet a presence, more like an awareness brushing against the edge of something newly disturbed. He paused beneath an overpass where shadows pooled thickly and the city noise dulled into a low, constant hum. For the first time since arriving, his smile faded. This was not just a place of lies. It was a broadcast, a signal layered over every screen, every cheer, every carefully edited truth. And signals once sent could be answered. Lucifer looked up into the dark gap between concrete and night sky, eyes narrowing slightly. "Careful," he said, not as a warning to the city, but as an observation to himself. The world had noticed him now, not consciously, not yet, but the rules had shifted just enough to be felt. And somewhere, far beyond cameras and contracts, something else felt it too. The ripple didn't announce itself. It never did. It moved through systems the way cold moves through metal, slow and unnoticed until something snapped. By the time anyone thought to name it, it had already settled into places meant to feel permanent. In a secure Vought analytics wing, far from the glass and slogans, a junior data analyst stared at his screen and felt his stomach drop. Engagement metrics were spiking in the wrong places. Not higher, not lower, sideways. Comments that didn't fit expected sentiment clusters. Clips stalling mid-argument instead of resolving into outrage or applause. Moments where people stopped typing, stopped reacting, stopped consuming. He refreshed twice, then checked the time, convinced he was tired enough to misread patterns. He was. Across the room, an older supervisor leaned back in his chair, fingers steepled, eyes narrowed at a different monitor. "Pull the raw feeds," he said quietly. "Unedited." "That's not," the analyst began, then stopped himself. His mouth had already betrayed him once today, blurting out a complaint he'd never meant to voice during a meeting. He didn't trust it anymore. He did as he was told. In the feeds they saw it, not clearly, not cleanly. A man standing still while others moved around him. A conversation that didn't escalate. A pause where a lie should have slid in smoothly and didn't. No explosions, no violence, just hesitation. The supervisor felt an unfamiliar tightness in his chest. "Who authorized this?" he asked. No one answered, not because they didn't know, because the question didn't apply. Elsewhere in the tower, Homelander stood in front of a mirror that showed him exactly what he wanted to see. Strong jaw, calm eyes. The kind of face people trusted instinctively. He adjusted the collar of his suit, smoothing imaginary wrinkles. The irritation from earlier had not faded. It had sharpened. He could feel it buzzing under his skin, a low-grade fury without a target. He hated that most of all. Someone knocked. He didn't answer right away. He waited until his reflection smiled back at him properly. "Come in." A handler stepped inside, careful, eyes flicking up and then away. "There's something odd on the street feeds," she said. "Probably nothing. But Stan asked us to flag anomalies." Homelander's smile didn't move. "Anomalies," he repeated, tasting the word like it might be poison. "Yes, just a few, people hesitating, not reacting on cue." His eyes hardened for a fraction of a second. "People don't hesitate," he said. "They're told what to feel." The handler nodded quickly. "Of course, this is probably just a glitch." Homelander watched her closely as she spoke. Something about her tone felt off. Too careful. Like she was choosing each word from a list she'd never had to think about before. It made his skin crawl. "Find it," he said, "whatever it is." She left, heart pounding, not entirely sure why she felt like she'd just lied to him, even though she hadn't. Annie felt it later that night, sitting alone in her apartment with the lights off. The city glow crept in through the windows, painting everything in washed-out color. She scrolled through her phone without really looking, thumb moving on instinct. Then she stopped. A clip had surfaced, not trending, not boosted, just there. A shaky shot of a street corner, a man asking a question, another man answering something raw and unfinished. No logo, no commentary, no music telling you how to feel. Annie watched it twice, then a third time. Her chest tightened. It wasn't the words that unsettled her. It was the lack of framing. No hero stepped in. No villain was exposed. The moment just existed, unresolved. She locked her phone and leaned back against the couch, staring at the ceiling. For a dangerous second, she imagined herself in that moment. Imagined answering honestly if someone asked her that question. The thought scared her enough that she stood up and paced until it passed. On the street, Lucifer felt the city's attention sharpen. Not eyes, intention. The subtle recalibration of systems trying to categorize him and failing. He walked slower now, letting the weight build, letting the signal clarify. He passed a church with its doors open and its lights warm, hymns drifting out into the night. He paused at the threshold but didn't enter. Faith here felt transactional, loud, afraid of silence. Behind him, a man stumbled out of the church, face pale, breathing hard. He nearly collided with Lucifer, then froze, staring as if recognition had arrived without explanation. "You," the man said hoarsely, "you asked me." Lucifer turned attentive, "And you answered." The man swallowed. "I didn't mean to, I don't even know why I said it." His hands shook. "I desire to leave, to stop pretending this fixes me." Lucifer studied him, then stepped aside, clearing the doorway. "Then go," he said simply. The man hesitated, torn between habit and relief. Then he walked past, shoulders slumping as if something heavy had finally been set down. Lucifer watched him disappear into the crowd. Above them, clouds rolled in thick and low, swallowing stars. The pressure returned, stronger now, curious, measuring. Lucifer felt it like a fingertip brushing against the back of his thoughts, not hostile, not friendly, interested. He exhaled slowly. That didn't take long, he murmured. In a secure office, Stan Edgar stood alone, hands clasped behind his back, staring out at the city. Reports waited on his desk. He didn't read them yet. He trusted his instincts more than data, and right now, something told him a new variable had entered the system, one that didn't respond to leverage or fear the way everything else did. He turned back to the room, eyes cold, mind already moving. "Find him," he said into the quiet, "before the public decides what he is." Outside, Lucifer resumed walking, the city bending subtly around his presence. The signal had been sent. The first responses were already forming. And somewhere beyond this world's thin edges, something began to lean closer, curious enough to listen. The city tried to correct itself. That was the first response. Not panic, not denial, adjustment. Algorithms shifted, trends were nudged, talking points were quietly reintroduced into the bloodstream of the public. Late-night shows made jokes that felt rehearsed even when they pretended not to be. News anchors smiled through segments that went nowhere. The machine did what it always did when something didn't fit. It tried to smooth the edges until people stopped noticing the shape. It almost worked. Almost. Lucifer noticed the effort before anyone else did. He felt it in the way conversations stalled mid-sentence, then restarted with safer words. In the way people flinched after speaking, checking themselves as if expecting punishment. The question lingered in the air even when he wasn't asking it. That was new. The world had learned the sound of it. In Vought Tower, a strategy room filled with quiet tension. Screens showed heat maps, engagement curves, and live feeds from half a dozen cities. Stan Edgar sat at the head of the table, fingers folded, listening while others spoke too much. "It's not violent," one executive said carefully. "There's no direct threat. We can spin this." "We already are," another added. "We just need a name, a narrative frame." Edgar lifted a hand. Silence fell instantly. "Frames only work when the subject wants to be framed," he said. "This one doesn't." A pause followed. Someone swallowed. "So what is he?" the executive asked. "A soup we missed, a cult leader." Edgar's eyes flicked to a frozen frame on one of the screens. Lucifer, half-turned, expression unreadable. "He's a variable," Edgar said, "and variables are dangerous when they don't respond to pressure." Homelander paced in the adjoining room, boots thudding softly against polished floors. He could hear the meeting through the wall, every muffled word scraping against his nerves. Variable. Dangerous. He didn't like that word applied to anything that wasn't under his fist. "They're afraid," he muttered to himself. "They just don't know it yet." His phone buzzed. A notification he hadn't approved. A clip. He stared at it, jaw tightening. Someone had slowed down footage of him from weeks ago, isolating a moment where his smile didn't reach his eyes. The caption read, "Why does he look like that?" Homelander crushed the phone in his hand. Plastic cracked, glass bit into his palm. He barely felt it. On the street, Lucifer sat on the edge of a low fountain, coat unbuttoned, watching people move past him in cautious arcs. A man nearby argued with his partner in a whisper too sharp to hide. A woman stood alone, typing and deleting the same message over and over. Desire hung around them like humidity. A young woman finally stopped in front of him, arms crossed tight over her chest. "You're him," she said, not accusing, not reverent, just tired. Lucifer looked up. "I am," he said. "You make people say things," she continued. "Things that ruin their lives." Lucifer considered that. "No," he said gently, "I make people hear themselves." She laughed once, brittle. "That's worse." "Yes," he agreed. She stared at him, eyes bright with unshed tears. "So what do you want?" Lucifer met her gaze. For the first time since arriving, he answered without turning the question back. "I want to see what you do next," he said. She stepped back like she'd been pushed, then turned and walked away, shoulders shaking. High above them, unnoticed by most, a thin line shimmered briefly in the air, like heat distortion where there shouldn't be any heat. It vanished almost immediately, but Lucifer felt it. The world wasn't just reacting anymore. It was being observed. An observation, he knew better than anyone, always came with intent. The first attempt to contain him was subtle. It had to be. Vought understood spectacle, but it also understood restraint. Force created martyrs. Silence created myths, so they tried something quieter. They followed him. Not with soldiers or capes, but with analysts and behavioral specialists. Cameras that didn't announce themselves. People trained to watch without interfering. Lucifer felt them almost immediately, the way one feels a gaze linger a second too long. It didn't bother him. It confirmed something he'd already suspected. The world didn't know what to call him yet, but it was already afraid of being wrong. He walked through a park as evening settled in, the grass damp, the air cool enough to slow breath. Children ran past him chasing something invisible and important. Parents watched from benches, phones half raised, caught between presents and documentation. Lucifer stopped near a man sitting alone, hands folded, staring at the ground as if waiting for it to answer him. "What do you desire?" Lucifer asked quietly. The man startled, then laughed nervously. "Everyone keeps asking me that now," he said, "like it's a joke." "And yet," Lucifer prompted. The man's shoulders sagged. "I desire to stop feeling like everything I do is already too late," he said. The words fell heavy between them. Lucifer nodded. "Time is cruel that way," he said. "It convinces you the door is closed when it's only quiet." The man blinked, confused, then thoughtful. He didn't say thank you. He didn't need to. He stood and walked away, slower than before but straighter. From across the park, a woman lowered her phone, hands shaking. She hadn't planned to record. She just started. Later, when she watched the clip again, she wouldn't remember lifting the camera. She'd only remember the sound of that answer echoing in her head. In Vought Tower, the clip appeared on a screen before it finished uploading anywhere else. Stan Edgar watched it without blinking. "It's not contagious," one analyst said carefully, "not in the traditional sense." Edgar's gaze didn't move. "No," he replied, "it's worse, it's permission." Homelander burst into the room before anyone could stop him. The temperature seemed to spike with his arrival. "Why is this still happening?" he demanded, gesturing at the screen. "Why hasn't someone shut him up?" The room went very still. Edgar turned slowly. "Because we don't know how," he said, "and guessing would be expensive." Homelander scoffed. "He's just a guy." Edgar finally looked at him, really looked. "So were you," he said calmly. "Once." Homelander's jaw tightened. He looked away first. That night the pressure Lucifer had been feeling sharpened. It wasn't curiosity anymore. It was alignment, like something far away had adjusted its focus. He stopped beneath a streetlight and looked up, eyes narrowing at nothing visible. "You're late," he said softly. The air didn't respond, but it thickened subtly, as if listening more closely now. Lucifer smiled, not pleased, not afraid, interested. Behind him, unseen, Vaught's watchers hesitated. One of them, a man who had spent years cataloging threats, felt a chill crawl up his spine. For the first time in his career, he didn't feel like he was observing something dangerous. He felt like he was being weighed. And somewhere deep in the structure of this world, a rule bent just enough to be noticed. By the third day, the world stopped pretending nothing was wrong. It wasn't chaos. Not yet. It was friction. Small delays where certainty used to live. Press briefings that ran long because no one wanted to be the one to say the wrong thing. Focus groups that stalled out when participants stopped repeating approved language and started sounding personal. The machine still moved, but it groaned now, like a structure forced to carry a weight it was never designed for. Lucifer felt the shift before he saw it. The city's desire had changed texture, less frantic, more defensive. People weren't just wanting anymore, they were bracing. He stood inside a late-night diner, the kind that smelled like burnt coffee and old grease, neon buzzing softly outside rain-streaked windows. A few patrons sat scattered in booths, pretending not to stare. The waitress refilled his cup without meeting his eyes, hands trembling slightly. She didn't ask him anything. She didn't need to. At the counter, a man in a suit stared into his reflection in the chrome napkin dispenser. His tie was loosened, his face gray with exhaustion. Lucifer slid onto the stool beside him. "What do you desire?" he asked. The man flinched, then laughed sharply. "Jesus," he said. "You can't just—" He stopped, swallowed. "I desire to not be afraid of losing everything if I stop lying." Lucifer nodded. "Then you already know the cost," he said. The man's eyes burned. "And you," he shot back, "what do you want?" Lucifer paused, just long enough to matter. "I want to see who survives the truth," he said quietly. The man pushed back from the counter and left without paying. Outside, rain fell harder, drumming against pavement and glass like a nervous system trying to calm itself. Across the city, in a secured underground facility that didn't officially exist, Vought convened a different kind of meeting. No cameras, no branding, just steel walls and soundproofing thick enough to make thoughts feel heavy. Stan Edgar stood at the head of the table, hands folded, eyes steady. "We are past observation," he said. "We are now in mitigation." A woman in a lab coat cleared her throat. "We've analyzed his interactions. He doesn't coerce. There's no detectable energy signature we recognize, but the effect is consistent. People answer." "And when they answer," Edgar prompted. "They destabilize," another voice said, "individually first, then socially." Edgar nodded once. "Then we adjust the environment." Homelander leaned against the wall, arms crossed, jaw tight. He hadn't spoken since arriving. He hated this room. Hated that no one looked impressed. Hated that the word mitigation didn't include him. "So what?" he finally snapped. "We're just going to let him walk around breaking people." Edgar turned to him. "We're going to redefine what he's doing," he said, "and then we're going to make him do it where we can see it." A screen lit up behind him showing a mock-up, a controlled space, a stage without calling itself one. Clean lines, soft lighting, invitations, not orders. "A platform," Edgar continued. "If he wants to ask questions, he can do it where we frame the answers." Homelander sneered. "You think he'll agree?" Edgar's gaze was calm. "Everyone agrees to something," he said. "The mistake is assuming its power." Lucifer sensed the decision as it happened, not the details, the intent, a narrowing of options. The city's hum changed pitch, like a radio tuning toward a specific frequency. He stopped walking and closed his eyes briefly, listening. "They're building a room," he murmured. "How thoughtful." The pressure returned then, heavier than before. Not hostile, assessing. Lucifer felt it brush against the edges of his presence, testing boundaries the way a hand tests glass before knocking. "Not yet," he said softly to no one and nothing. "I know." On a rooftop nearby, Annie January stood alone, phone clenched in her hand. She had just finished watching another clip. This one was different, not a stranger, someone she recognized. A mid-level Vought employee she'd done a charity event with once. The woman's voice shook as she admitted something small and ugly and real. Annie felt sick. This wasn't exposure the way she'd imagined it. This didn't feel righteous. It felt invasive, necessary maybe, but cruel in a quiet way that didn't care who it hurt. She looked out over the city, lights blurred by rain, and for the first time in a long while, she wondered whether telling the truth always made you better, or just more alone. Below her, unseen, Lucifer walked on, every step drawing lines that couldn't be erased. Vought moved to meet him, confident in its structures, certain it could contain anything given enough planning. And somewhere beyond the thin places of this world, something shifted its weight, no longer content to simply watch. The invitation arrived without fanfare. No press release. No announcement. Just a quiet message routed through channels designed to feel personal even when they were. Lucifer received it while standing on a pedestrian bridge, watching traffic crawl beneath him like something trapped in its own momentum. A place to talk. A place to listen. A place to ask questions safely. He read the words once, then folded the device and slipped it into his pocket. "So that's the shape of the cage," he said softly. Vought moved quickly after that. Construction crews worked overnight. Designers debated textures and lighting like priests arguing doctrine. Psychologists weighed in on seating arrangements, on the distance between bodies, on the illusion of intimacy without vulnerability. They built a room that promised honesty without consequence, confession without collapse. Stan Edgar walked through it alone before anyone else was allowed inside. He stood in the center, hands clasped behind his back, and listened to the silence. "People don't want truth," he said quietly to the empty space. "They want relief. Relief could be managed." Lucifer arrived unannounced 2 nights later. No escort, no resistance. Security doors opened for him without alarms, not because he forced them, but because the systems couldn't decide he was a threat. He stepped into the room and felt the weight of it immediately. Soft walls, warm light, no sharp edges, everything designed to absorb impact. "How kind," he murmured. "You padded it." Edgar waited for him near the far wall, expression neutral. "You could say that," he replied. "We prefer to think of it as responsible." Lucifer turned slowly, taking him in. "You believe responsibility comes from control," he said. Edgar met his gaze. "I believe responsibility comes from predictability." They studied each other in silence, 2 philosophies standing very still. "You're not wrong," Lucifer said finally. "You're just incomplete." Edgar gestured toward the center of the room. "Sit," he said, not a command, an assumption. Lucifer smiled and did not move. "You want me here because I disrupt your narratives," he said. "You want me visible so I can be edited." "We want you contextualized," Edgar corrected. "Uncertainty frightens people." Lucifer nodded. "Good," he said. "They should be frightened." Edgar's eyes sharpened. "Fear makes people irrational." "No," Lucifer said gently. "Fear makes people honest. It's what they do next that matters." Outside the room, screens lit up as the first controlled session began. Carefully selected participants sat across from Lucifer, hands folded, breathing shallow. They'd been told this was voluntary. That word meant less than it used to. Lucifer asked his question. Some answers were small, harmless. A desire for recognition, for rest, for forgiveness. Vought's analysts relaxed slightly. This could work. This could be shaped. Then a woman's voice cracked. "I desire to stop pretending I didn't know," she said. "About the test site, about the kids." The room went very still. Lucifer said nothing. He didn't need to. The silence did the work for him. Edgar watched from behind glass, expression unchanged. Inside, something tightened. Homelander watched too. His jaw clenched so hard it hurt. He hated the way the room leaned toward Lucifer without touching him. Hated that no one was looking at him. "Say something," he muttered at the screen. "Fix it." Lucifer finally spoke. "And what will you do now that you've said it?" he asked the woman. She stared at her hands. "I don't know," she whispered. "That's honest," Lucifer replied. "It's a start." The session ended early. By morning, clips had leaked. Not the worst ones, not the safest either. Just enough to destabilize. Just enough to make people wonder what else had been said off camera. Annie watched one of the clips alone in a dark room, heart pounding. She recognized the pattern now. This wasn't exposure for its own sake. This was pressure, a forcing of choice. She hated that part of her, admired it. That afternoon, she requested a meeting with Edgar. It was denied. That evening, she went looking for Lucifer. She found him standing on the edge of the river, city lights shivering across the water's surface. He didn't turn when she approached. "You let them build it," she said. "Yes," he replied. "Why?" Lucifer looked at the water. "Because people show you who they are faster when they think they're safe." She swallowed. "You're hurting people." "Yes," he said again. "And so are you just do it quietly." The words stung because they were careful, not cruel. "You don't get to decide what breaks us," Annie said. Lucifer turned then, eyes steady. "You're right," he said. "You do." The pressure surged suddenly, sharp and unmistakable. Annie gasped, clutching the railing. The air felt thin, stretched. Lucifer straightened, expression darkening. "Something's wrong," he said. High above the city, invisible lines trembled. Not a tear, not yet, more like a response clearing its throat. Vought's room had done more than contain him. It had amplified the signal. And whatever had been listening was no longer satisfied with echoes. The city woke the next morning with the sensation that something had leaned too close in the night. Nothing was broken, trains ran, markets opened. News anchors smiled through the usual cadence of reassurance, but the air felt thinner, stretched, as if the world had inhaled and forgotten how to exhale. People paused mid-step without knowing why. Words lodged in throats more often than they used to. Silence lingered after questions that normally would have been filled automatically. Lucifer felt it immediately, not as danger but as proximity. He stood at the edge of an empty lot where a building had been demolished years ago and never replaced. The ground was uneven, littered with broken concrete and weeds that refused to die. It was the kind of place the city forgot on purpose. He liked those places. They were honest about absence. The pressure hovered now, no longer distant. It pressed against him from angles that didn't belong to geography. Not hostile, curious, in the way predators sometimes are when they haven't decided what something is yet. "You're not from here," Lucifer said quietly. The air vibrated in response. Not sound, agreement. Somewhere deep in Vought Tower, alarms flickered on and off without triggering protocols. Engineers blamed software fatigue. Stan Edgar didn't. He watched the data scroll and felt something old and unpleasant settle into his chest. This wasn't public relations anymore. This wasn't narrative containment. This was attention. He convened a meeting that didn't exist on any schedule. No SUPs, no branding teams, just people who understood thresholds and consequences. A woman with gray hair and sharp eyes spoke first. "If this is an external intelligence," she said carefully, "then it responded to stimulus." Edgar nodded. And stimulus implies escalation. Homelander stood near the door, arms crossed, restless. He hadn't slept. Every time he closed his eyes, he felt watched, not admired, not feared, evaluated. "So what?" he snapped. "Now we're being audited by the universe." The woman hesitated. That may not be the worst way to describe it. Homelander laughed, sharp and brittle. "I'm not afraid of it." Edgar looked at him. "That's not relevant," he said. "Fear doesn't determine consequence." On the streets, Annie felt the change too. She stood outside a hospital, watching people move in and out with tired purpose. A man sat on the curb with his head in his hands, breathing too fast. She crouched beside him without thinking. "Hey," she said softly, "look at me." He did, eyes wild. "I said something," he blurted. "Last night on a stream, I didn't mean to, I can't take it back." Annie's chest tightened. "What did you say?" "That I knew," he whispered. "About the cover-up, I thought it would feel cleaner." She didn't know what to tell him. There was no script for this, no approved response. She put a hand on his shoulder instead, light, warm, but restrained. "It's not over," she said. It was the best truth she had. Lucifer watched moments like this multiply, not just in one city, in others. The question had traveled further than he intended, or perhaps exactly as far as it needed to. That was when he felt it fully. a presence settling into alignment with this reality, adjusting its shape to fit, not entering violently, entering carefully, as if it had done this before and learned patience the hard way. Lucifer's expression grew serious. "Ah," he said softly, "you're not just listening anymore." The ground beneath his feet trembled just slightly, not an earthquake, a resonance. Somewhere something had found a frequency it liked. In the distance, sirens wailed, not for disaster but for uncertainty. Vought scrambled to respond, deploying familiar tools against an unfamiliar problem. Homelander lifted into the sky, scanning for threats he could punch. He saw nothing. That scared him more than seeing too much. Lucifer took a slow breath, feeling the weight of choice press in on him from all sides. This world was no longer just reacting to him. It was becoming a signal strong enough to draw others. And whatever had answered was patient, old, and deciding whether this universe was worth keeping. The presence did not announce itself with light or sound. It announced itself with restraint. Lucifer felt it settle into the empty spaces first, the gaps between buildings, the pauses between words, the silence that followed questions no one wanted to answer. It pressed gently, almost politely, against the fabric of the world, as if asking permission to exist here. That alone made it dangerous. "This isn't your jurisdiction," Lucifer said, standing in the middle of a closed street where traffic lights blinked yellow without conviction. The air folded inward, not violently, thoughtfully. Jurisdiction is a human concept. The response did not arrive as a voice. It arrived as certainty. Lucifer smiled faintly without humor. "That's what everyone says right before they overstep." Across the city, the consequences rippled outward. Subs felt their abilities hesitate, not failing but questioning. A train stumbled during a routine run, speed flickering like a bad signal before snapping back too hard, sending him skidding into a barrier. Maeve froze mid-lift, strength draining just long enough for doubt to surface before the weight dropped harmlessly back into place. None of it was catastrophic. All of it was unsettling. Power was being asked to justify itself. In Vought Tower, panic finally shed its professional skin. Meetings dissolved into arguments. Projections contradicted each other. The word anomaly appeared so often it lost meaning. Stan Edgar watched it all with a stillness that unnerved his subordinates more than shouting ever could. "This is no longer about him," he said quietly. "It's about what he's drawn here." A technician hesitated. "Sir, if this presence is evaluating the system." "Then the system will try to defend itself," Edgar finished. "And systems always choose force when they run out of narrative." Homelander hovered outside the tower, cape snapping violently. He could feel it now unmistakably. Not a rival, not an enemy, something worse. Something that didn't care whether he existed. "Show yourself," he shouted into the open sky. Nothing answered. Lucifer watched him from below, expression unreadable. "Careful," he murmured. "It's not impressed by volume." Annie found Lucifer again as the city darkened prematurely, clouds thickening into a ceiling that pressed low over rooftops. She didn't know how she knew where to look. She just followed the feeling until it sharpened. "You didn't tell us this could happen," she said, breathless. Lucifer turned to her. "I didn't know," he replied honestly. That stopped her. He saw it register, the absence of manipulation, the lack of control. For the first time, she didn't feel like she was standing near a god or a devil. Just someone who had miscalculated. "What is it?" she asked. Lucifer looked up at the sky. "An auditor," he said after a moment. "Of sorts. It monitors realities that destabilize too quickly, universes that broadcast too loudly." Her throat tightened. "And we're too loud now." "Yes," Lucifer said softly, "thanks to me." The presence shifted again, closer now. Buildings groaned, not from stress but from misalignment. Windows vibrated without shattering. People froze mid-step, hearts racing for reasons they couldn't name. Lucifer straightened. "This is where I intervene," he said. Annie stared at him. "You can stop it." "I can redirect it," he replied, "but there will be a cost." She didn't ask what, she already knew. High above them, Vought's final contingency activated. Satellites realigned. Signals pulsed. Not weapons. Constraints. Systems designed to anchor reality by force, to define what was allowed to exist. The presence noticed immediately. So did Lucifer. "Ah," he said quietly, "that was foolish." The sky darkened another shade. The pressure spiked. Somewhere deep in the city, something cracked, not glass but certainty. Lucifer closed his eyes, drawing the attention fully onto himself. "If you're going to judge," he said into the tightening air, "then look at me, not them." For the first time, the presence hesitated. And in that hesitation, the world held its breath. The silence that followed was not empty, it was loaded. Lucifer felt it coil around him, dense and deliberate, like a thought that had taken physical form. The presence no longer brushed the edges of reality. It stood within it now, unseen but undeniable, occupying the same conceptual space where laws pretended to be permanent. The city seemed to lean inward, buildings subtly skewed, distances feeling unreliable, as if perspective itself had begun to question its own authority. This was the moment systems were built to prevent. Vought's contingency grid hummed at full capacity. Satellites maintained rigid alignment, broadcasting constraints meant to reinforce the borders of the possible. Not weapons, definitions. Lines drawn by frightened minds who believed that if something could be described precisely enough, it could be controlled. Stan Edgar watched the feeds from a sealed room deep underground. Power indicators glowed steady. For the first time since this began, the data looked stable. "That's it," someone whispered. "We're holding it." Edgar didn't respond. Stability that arrived this suddenly was rarely trustworthy. Above ground, Homelander floated motionless against a sky that had gone flat and colorless, like a photograph drained of saturation. He felt heavy, not weakened, reduced, as if gravity had renegotiated its relationship with him personally. "This is your fault," he snarled, staring down at the city. "You did this." Lucifer didn't look at him. He was focused on the pressure in front of him, the presence that had finally stopped adjusting and started deciding. "You're right," Lucifer said calmly. "It is." Annie stood a few steps behind him, arms wrapped around herself, light flickering nervously beneath her skin. She'd never felt smaller or more awake. "What happens now?" she asked. Lucifer exhaled slowly. "Now," he said, "they choose what kind of universe they want to be." The presence shifted, reacting not to fear or defiance but to clarity. It pressed harder, collapsing probabilities, tightening the space where contradiction could survive. Buildings creaked. Radios spat static. A low hum vibrated through bone and glass alike. Lucifer stepped forward into it. Pain arrived not as injury but as definition, the sensation of being outlined by something that had never needed to ask permission before. He felt the pull of narratives trying to simplify him. Devil, anomaly, threat, variable to be neutralized. He smiled faintly through the strain. "You misunderstand me," he said. "I don't belong to categories." The presence pushed back harder, unimpressed. In Vought Tower, alarms began to scream. The grid spiked, struggling to maintain coherence. Engineers shouted over one another as equations unraveled faster than they could be rewritten. "We're losing containment," someone yelled. "No," Edgar corrected quietly. "We're losing authorship." On the streets, people dropped to their knees without knowing why. Some prayed, some cursed, some simply waited, feeling the shape of the world press down and realizing, dimly, that no one was in charge the way they'd been promised. Lucifer felt the cost rising now. Redirecting attention at this scale meant sacrifice, not destruction, removal. He glanced back once, meeting Annie's eyes. There was no apology there, only resolve. "Remember this," he said, "the moment when you were seen." Then he turned fully toward the presence and let it focus on him alone. The pressure surged, and somewhere beyond sight, beyond language, a decision was made. The world did not end. That was the first surprise. There was no rupture, no collapse of sky into fire or streets folding into nothingness. The pressure peaked, held, and then did something far more unsettling. It resolved, like a question that had finally received an answer it didn't like but had to accept. Lucifer felt himself thinning. Not dying, not fading in the way humans feared, being unthreaded from a narrative that no longer required him to remain present. The presence pressed close now, no longer curious, no longer testing. Certain. You are the catalyst, not the correction. The meaning arrived without cruelty, just fact. Lucifer laughed softly, breath misting in air that felt suddenly lighter. "Story of my existence," he replied. Around him, the city exhaled. Buildings straightened imperceptibly. Distances reasserted themselves. Color bled back into the sky in hesitant gradients. The hum that had lived in everyone's bones loosened its grip, leaving behind exhaustion and confusion and a strange, hollow relief. Annie staggered as the pressure lifted, catching herself against a railing. Her hands glowed once, instinctively, then dimmed. She looked around, heart pounding, searching. "Lucifer," she called. He stood a few steps away now, edges soft, like a reflection losing fidelity. Rain passed through him without quite touching. "It's over," he said gently. Her throat tightened. "You're leaving." "Yes." "Because of them." She gestured vaguely upward, toward the systems, the watchers, the unseen arbiters. Lucifer shook his head. "Because of you," he said. "Because this world can no longer pretend it didn't choose." She stared at him, anger and gratitude tangling painfully in her chest. "You don't get to just disappear after doing this," she said. "You changed everything." Lucifer smiled, and this time there was no irony in it. "Exactly." High above, Homelander felt the weight lift all at once. The silence in his head cracked, not back into noise, but into something worse. Space. Possibility. He hovered uncertainly, realizing no one was telling him what he was supposed to feel. For the first time, the sky did not affirm him. In Vought Tower, systems stabilized. Alerts cleared. Executives slowly emerged from sealed rooms, blinking like survivors of a storm that left no visible wreckage. Stan Edgar sat alone, hands folded, staring at a report that refused to summarize what had happened. He closed the file. Power still existed, structures remained, but something essential had slipped through their fingers. Control, once questioned, did not return easily. On the streets, people stood up. Some cried without understanding why. Some laughed hysterical with relief. Some went back to work, already rehearsing new explanations. The world resumed, scarred but intact. Lucifer took a step back, presence thinning further. "What happens now?" Annie asked quietly. Lucifer considered the city one last time. "Now," he said, "you live without a devil to blame." That hurt more than she expected. He looked past her then, past the skyline, past the layered noise of humanity continuing despite everything. The pull returned, gentle but insistent, drawing him away from a universe that had answered loudly enough to be heard. Before he vanished completely, he spoke once more, not to Annie alone but to the world itself. "Choice is heavier than power," he said. "Carry it carefully." And then he was gone. No thunder marked his departure. No void remained, just absence. Weeks later, the effects lingered. Subs hesitated more often. Not all of them. Not enough. But the pauses were there, captured in shaky footage and unfinished headlines. Public faith wavered, not replaced by certainty, but by questions that refused to stay buried. Annie testified when asked. She didn't become a savior. She became something harder to dismiss. Homelander tried to perform heroism without an audience dictating the terms. Some days he failed. Some days he didn't. The difference haunted him. Vought survived, smaller, sharper, less confident in its invisibility. And the world continued, uneasy and awake. Far beyond it, Lucifer drifted, not triumphant, not punished, changed. This universe had not begged for salvation. It had panicked, it had lied, it had reached for control. But in the end, it had hesitated. That hesitation mattered. Lucifer smiled faintly as the last thread slipped free. Not every world deserved saving. This one deserved to decide.